Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you may be, wherever across the world. Thanks so much for joining us live here today for Serverless Office Hours. We're back on the AWS Twitch channel this week and, of course, on Serverless Land YouTube. And welcome if you're joining us via LinkedIn Live as well. I'm Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate for the serverless team at AWS. And this week, I am super duper happy to welcome, back Ali Spittel, who is a manager of AWS front-end web and mobile. So the other DAs on the mobile side. Ali, how are you today?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Always happy to hear about the cool things that are going on at within the Amplify world. And there's no one better. I'm slightly starstruck because we've got Ali speaking to us today, which is super cool. So remember, we are live. So please send us your questions if you have them via the chat mechanisms, and we can bring them up on screen. And Ali or myself will be able to answer them. Certainly, if they're going to be Amplify questions, definitely Ali is going to be way more expert than me. From Amplify or serverless in general. If you didn't watch last week, we had an awesome show last week because .NET is now available on Lambda. So we're just going back to see what's happened over the past week in the general world of servers. Norm Johansson did an awesome demo. There was cool stuff like Ready to Run, which is a way you can better compile .NET to run a little faster, so cold starts aren't a problem, and a whole bunch of work that Norm and the team have done for bringing .NET on Lambda. So that was a really good show, packed full of demos to help you get the best of .NET on Lambda. Over the past week, some what's new stuff in the serverless world. Well, Amplify is up here, of course. We've got the Lambda with .NET, and also, there's a spelling mistake. Sorry, there's some other strange company called Maison rather than Amazon. DevOps Guru has support for Lambda with Code Guru with a profile integration. So if that's interesting, have a look at that. And obviously, Amplify has two sort of things that have come out recently. The general Jeepers, what's going on today? The general availability of the Authenticator UI library for Flutter. Ali, what's the quick gist on that?
So we have these really, really, really awesome UI components that you can use in order to enable front-end authentication for your application after you've enabled back-end authentication through Cognito. So you can go to ui.docs.amplify.aws and you can see all the visuals and all that. They're really pretty. I really, really enjoy using them. It's like a line of code to get a full authentication flow with sign up, sign in, reset password, all that.
Okay, cool. That sounds really good. Yeah, go and have a look. I will post a link quickly of this link so you can get all the sort of announcements, and then also a developer preview of the Amplify iOS library rewritten to entirely use Swift. I suppose that's sort of self-explanatory. It's iOS and Swift. So, but anything else you'd like to say about that?
I don't think so.
Cool. Done. So then just quickly going on and looking over the blogs of the last week, .NET is straight up there. Also, James Easton wrote a really cool blog about migrating a monolithic .NET REST API to Lambda. And this is one of the patterns we see quite often when you have a big Lambda function with sort of lots of code and parts and everything. How do you pass that out and be able to use API Gateway a little bit more effectively and get even more serverless with less code, which is always pretty cool. If you're thinking about protobuf messages, and this is some kind of things people use Kinesis for, so this is a way you can decode those messages using Lambda, and Ennio Pastore had a really good blog post on that. And then a really cool one that literally only just came out an hour or so ago is a service image catalog system using the step functions Workflow Studio. Workflow Studio is an awesome tool connected to an awesome service called Step Functions, and allows you to just visually build your step function state machines. And I'm a visual person when I learn, so when I see this, and it's a way that you can then connect with all the different SDK calls, it really makes it super cool to be able to build Step Functions workflow. And there's a blog post out today to help you do that. Just something that has also come out over the past week is Jay Nair, who's one of our big bosses of Lambda and one of the founders of Lambda, has teamed up with Jan Trey and Peter Sparsky, who are in the whole serverless frame of reference in the entire world, some of the absolute top gurus. And this new book has come out, the second edition of Serverless Architectures on AWS. I've been going through it, really nice explanations, taking you really from the beginning, what is serverless, some really good explanations of what it is, and then obviously delving super deep into some of the things we're doing here at AWS. So definitely, if you're getting your feet wet or you're want to get sort of ramp up on serverless on AWS, this is a really great book, and it's available via Manning with a link on the bottom, which I will post shortly. But that's the past week. Let's all over to Ali now. And Ali, can you please tell us about Amplify Studio?
Yeah, totally. So at reInvent this year, we got to launch Amplify Studio, which is a brand new workflow that allows front-end developers to generate React components that are cloud connected, but you can also do so from your own designs in a design tool called Figma, which I think is mind-blowing because so much of your time as a developer is implementing these designers designed in this pixel perfect way, and then the designer changes something and you don't implement it perfectly and they get really annoyed at you. And so we're trying to solve that problem and just speed up the front end developer workflow too. Like I actually stopped being a front end engineer professionally because I thought so much of my job was like implementing forms over and over again. And so that's why I'm excited about building developer tools now. So I'm going to build out a travel application, kind of like Airbnb or Verbo or any of those. So I'm going to start off at sandbox.amplifyapp.com. And I don't think my screen is up.
Oh, sorry, that's me, and I'm not paying attention.
No, you're good. Thank you so much.
I'm looking at you, listening to what you're talking about, and like, oh, the screen's not up. Anyways, screen is up.
No, there you go. There you go.
So was that sandbox.amplifyapp.com?
Yes, exactly. Sandbox.amplifyapp.com.
I'll post
and then it'll redirect you to like getting started, but you don't need to type that in. And then you get to choose what you want to build and what stack you want to build with. So we're going to build with React, and React is what is enabled for the UI builder right now. So we'll stick with React, but there are those different options. Amplify itself supports all different front-end frameworks. So Vue, vanilla JavaScript, Angular, but then also those mobile frameworks as well. So Flutter, React Native, iOS, and Android as well. I'm going to start with a blank data model, but you can start with one that's populated if you want. And then we're going to add some data models. So you can do all of this in this visual interface. It's kind of like when you build an ERD or entity relational diagram, but then you can press deploy and it'll just deploy that data model for you.
Excuse my ignorance, an entity something diagram. Is that a front-end specific thing?
No, it's like a SQL thing. Like a lot of times you will build out a diagram of your data models before you actually implement them into your database so that you know how your data is related and all that. So we're going to do that, but then we're going to be able to deploy that and not have to do that second step in code.
Cool. No, that's where my brain was. I was still thinking on the front end Amplify, and I was like, no, that didn't make sense. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to add some fields. So name, image, price, and then location. And I can choose all the data types for these as well. So I am going to keep the name as a string, but I'm going to make it required. So I can just focus on it and then click is required there. And then an image, this is going to be a URL. So we're going to have a URL stored to an image. We have storage or S3 under the hood enabled within Amplify Studio as well. It's in developer preview. I'm just going to go straight to an image URL here, but you could also store the images yourself in an S3 bucket if you wanted to. And then my price, I'm going to do an integer. And then my location will be a string as well. So then you can create other models and make relationships between them. So for example, I could have a trip associated with a rental, and that might have a start date and an end date, or maybe there are different prices for different dates, and I could move that out into a different model. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to just do one model for today, but just know that you can create others and make them related to one another. You do like many to many or many to one, all those types of relationships. So then you can go ahead and test this out in your app, and you actually don't need to deploy to AWS. So this is completely signed out of AWS. I could do this in an incognito window without even having an AWS account. All of this is lives completely outside of the AWS console. So you can test this all locally in this stage without any fear of racking up charges or anything like that. It's not even connected to an AWS account at this phase. And so then you're testing out your data model just in the browser. So the data model that Amplify Studio uses is data store. And data store by default stores your data both online and offline. So offline, it's going to be stored in your IndexedDB in the browser. And then once you deploy, it'll sync to DynamoDB behind the scenes. And you don't need to add additional logic for that online-offline relationship. Super nice. When I was a software engineer, one of the things that I worked on was a form that automatically saved your data in the browser in case you went offline. And I think that's a very common use case that you'll need if you're a mobile developer, especially. So
but then that automatically syncs up to the cloud once you reconnect it again, and you're not having to recode anything to do that.
No, awesome. No additional logic on your end. We'll just add an endpoint that says, hey, also store this in DynamoDB, and it'll do that for you.
Alpacodes is just asking, thank you, Alpacodes, for joining us again. Assuming the data modeling creates a DynamoDB database table, or is this how the data connectivity works? It needs to use DynamoDB?
Yep, it uses DynamoDB under the hood. And once we deploy, then that will create the DynamoDB instance. Okay. But you could try it without creating a DynamoDB instance. You can just try it out locally without needing to deploy first, too.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you.
So it's kind of that sandbox environment where you don't need to worry about having it all right away. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy. And I do have an AWS account. They are my employer, so I don't need to make one, but you can make one if you need one too. And then we'll go ahead and create an application name. So we'll do vacation rental serverless. I'll just name it this so that I can tell between all of the different apps in my account. And you can also choose a deployment region. So you all, being folks that are familiar with serverless, usually know what regions are, but usually my front-end web and mobile folks maybe are a little bit less sure. So I just say, pick the region that's closest to where your customers are going to be. So then we'll take a couple minutes and deploy. During these stages, always wish that like the console played the Jeopardy music or something like that while things were building. But while that's going, I can answer any questions that folks have.
Certainly. There are some, Igor Cavayo de Paula, I hope I'm getting your name okay. But yeah, when the Amplify will integrate with step functions, do you have a forecast?
So I don't have a date in mind, but I would love to hear your use case. You can either send a direct message on Twitter. I think that my Twitter was posted in the chat, or you can just post it in the chat here as well. I'd love to hear your use case, but I also plug that we released a bunch of extensibility features at reInvent. And so what that allows you to do is use the CDK to connect to anything within the AWS ecosystem more generally, not just stuff that's generally enabled by Amplify itself. So very much feel enabled to use the extensibility features in order to enable step functions immediately.
Cool, thank you. And Igor, welcome from Brazil. Oh, absolutely love Brazil, have visited. So yeah, thank you for joining us from, I suppose, a triangular from where Ali is in the US, I'm in the UK, Brazil, maybe a triangle. Yeah. Maybe that's reaching too far, but anyway. Dan MBA, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for your question. Is there any way to get specific scopes from Amplify UI? Tried it recently, but couldn't get the email scope my API needed.
Could they give any more context to that question?
Yeah, Dan. Do a follow-on question, and hopefully we can be able to help you and give you a bit more information. That's it for now, I think. Anything else? Well, I suppose Alpacodes does have a follow-up on how this was when we were talking about the data modeling creates the DynamoDB table in the background and does that syncing. And then how does that work with single table design? I mean, the recommendation is to start with access patterns versus data modeling first.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that we try to make Amplify a service where you need to know as little of the underlying services as possible. So it is DynamoDB, but we try to add an abstraction layer on top of that that makes it more easy to interact with. The other thing is that since the data is offline first, that's another really important thing to think about when you're modeling your data is what data you want to sync onto that local machine instead of just being stored in the cloud. And so that changes, I think, the need for early like single table design or anything like that, because the data is going to be accessed offline first.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, just back on the local development, Hanish Garg, thanks for joining us. Does this mean we have local development capability with Amplify like Sam allows for serverless? I'm going to say yes, but no, but I think this is the Amplify local development environment. Sam doesn't require an AWS account. Actually, it does well on the deploy, but you can do SAM local testing. So I suppose this does in a similar way. Yeah, SAM doesn't actually need an AWS account unless you are actually deploying it. So,
yeah, there you go. Very similar. Cool. So my data model is still deploying, so we'll wait on that. But I want to show the UI library functionality. So this is what I'm really, really excited about. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Figma. If you've never heard of Figma before, it is a design tool. It's heavily, heavily used by designers. The last couple of software engineering teams that I've used have used Figma to work with their designers. It's similar to something like Sketch or Adobe XD or any of those types of tools, those design software. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this template. And you can see that there are all these primitives, these UI primitives here. So things like buttons and badges and labels and alerts and all of those nice things. And these correspond to the Amplify UI components. So there are buttons within this and checkbox fields and all that. And these are implemented in React. So this is the visual version that a designer would use. And then this is the React version that the developer would use. And then there are components. So these are combinations of those primitives put together. And you can totally create your own. You can edit these in any ways that you want. I'm going to go ahead here and I will bold some of this text and also round this component. So there is this classic long sleeve t-shirt component here, and I'm going to use this to demo my vacation rentals. So all my different houses or apartments will have one of these different cards. So I'm going to bold this text again, and then I'll keep this price right here. I like kind of a rounded corner, so I'm going to increase that a little bit. So now you can see that the corners on the image are rounded, and I'm also going to remove this background color. This is the part of the demo I struggle with the most because I'm not a designer. So I hack my way through the design things and then can do the code
I was just
part.
thinking I'm terrible at design kind of things. I was looking at this going, this is at least way better than I would ever hack with design things. At least there's sort of slidey bars and checkboxes and that thing. Ben Smith on our team, he's an amazing designer. So luckily we have someone to handle our design needs. But yeah, I'm with you on the, oh dear, design.
Yeah. Okay. So now this card looks a little bit different. I removed the white background on it. And I can do the same with these different components. I can also start completely from scratch and make my own as well. I can use these different primitives, or I can just make something myself. But if I made it myself, it would be very ugly. So I won't go ahead and do that to all of you.
But I suppose the point of it is there are those existing components. So yes, you can create stuff from scratch, but the whole point of this is that you've got a whole bunch of stuff already there to grab.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've got the stuff to choose from, so you don't need to start from scratch. There's also a Figma plugin that you can install and change all the color themes and all that just in one click. So for example, like right now, most of my buttons are this teal color, and that's this way over here. But using this Figma plugin, I could change it so that all the primary colors that right now is this green color could be like pink instead or something along those lines. So it's really easy to update this Figma file, even if you are more of a developer than a designer, which I'm guessing most of the listeners are. So what I'm going to do is go back to Amplify Studio now and paste in my Figma file link. Then I'll press continue and allow access. And this is the really cool part. So it just inputted all of those components from Figma into Amplify Studio. So now I can either accept or reject these different UI components. I want to show you the one that I updated. Okay, so this is the one that I updated in Amplify Studio, where I added the rounded corners and I removed the background color and bolded the text. So everything that I changed pulled into Figma, and if I updated all the components, that would happen as well. So I'm going to go ahead and accept all so that I don't need to click through all 29 of them. And I also just want to flag that this UI library portion of Amplify is in developer preview. Most of it's in general availability, but just this UI library is in developer preview. It will hopefully go GA soon, but that's just something to think about when you're using this, is that it might not be what you want to go into production yet. It's more something to test out and then put into production in when it goes,
when it's properly baked. Yeah. Is there, with it being in preview, is there any specific feedback you wanting for it during the preview?
On everything, honestly. If anybody has any feedback whatsoever, send it over, because this is a really good time to implement all those changes that people have feedback about. Okay, now I'm going to go in to my card A component. So this is the one that I just created, and I can configure this component. So this is awesome. What I can do is I can click in, and I can actually set this image to be the image from my data. And this can be the name of my rental and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back over to this content tab. So this is a really lightweight CMS where I can add data and manipulate it and all that. So I'm going to add a couple rentals. So and let's see, where should this be? And then I'll use Unsplash for the pictures. It's probably not what you want for a vacation rental, but that's okay. So then I'll save this one, and this data syncs. And I think this is super nice because as a software engineer, so often I would have to implement two apps, one that the end user would use and one for the admins of the site or the employees of the company, where they'd have to, create data, but then they'd also have admin users, which would be able to go into the back end and edit anything themselves. So that's already pre-built for you, which I think is really nice with this.
Ali, while you're adding those in, we just do have two questions. One from Juan. Thanks for joining us. Is support for Svelte on the roadmap?
That's a great question. It's definitely a feature request. I would love if there's a GitHub issue for it, I believe. And if you plus one on that, it might speed up the Svelte support. That being said, Amplify does work with vanilla JavaScript. And so you can, there won't be all the UI components and all that fancy stuff, but the JavaScript library should still work.
Okay, cool. And then, yeah, and also on the, plus one on those GitHub issues, I presume adding more context and more information always helps for people who are triaging them. Then TS, are we able to use material UI React components with Amplify?
So right now, what we're officially supporting is the Amplify Figma file, so the one that I just used. That being said, there have been some customers who have been using other Figma files and have had results with that. So I'm not officially saying that we support that or anything like that, but I am saying that other people have tried it. So
it may be possible, yeah. Little bit of hacky kind of stuff, and you can probably get it to work.
Yeah. So if you have a Figma file for that material UI.
Cool. And then last one's Alpa codes again. Does Amplify generate CSS for the designs, and is the CSS embedded with their React components?
Yeah, so this UI library has a CSS file associated with it. And so the base CSS is from that file, and you can add theming to that as well. So you can add a object essentially to override any of the default styling from that. You can also use like CSS variables as well. And then the React components that are generated all have props that you can use to override any of the styling as well. So you can either override the styling globally by changing the CSS or the styling object, or you can change an individual component as well. So there's definitely CSS that is generated. It's like a base CSS file.
Okay, and then is the content CMS Amplify's version of Lorem Ipsum generator? Oh, I mean, I wouldn't think so. I think it's actually the content you can put in. It's not necessarily just a placeholder.
Yeah, so this is the actual content for your application. That being said, with Amplify, you can have multiple environments. So right now I have a staging environment, but I could also have like a prod and a dev environment if I wanted to. And there's also seeding. So you can do auto-generate data right here. And if you say that you want to generate like 10 rows of data, you can add different constraints as well. So the name you might want to be word length that's 15 characters long or something along those lines. Okay. So I'm not going to go ahead and run this because I created the better data that will look a little bit nicer. But if you want to, you can very much just generate seed data here too. Cool. So I am going to go in now and I'm going to add my data to my components. So I'm going to add my prop right here, which is going to be my rental. And the data type is, instead of just being a string, is going to be my rental instance itself. Then if I click on this image, so there's like a little bit of a faint blue line, not sure if you can see it, but if you want to change the image, you change the source attribute within HTML or within React. And so I'm going to set this source to the rental image. Sometimes it gets a little, I think I have to refresh it. Give me a minute here. Okay, then the label here is going to be the rental's name. And then this child property, I'm going to set the label to, I'm going to start with the quotation mark $. I'm going to display the price here. And then add in the rental price here. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this page. You have to refresh after running the seed data in order to see it live in your component. Okay, so now I have my beach house. Looks like my pictures aren't working properly. Great. Oh, I accidentally used the iStock images instead of the, let me see here. I'm going to go back into my content tab real quick and change these image links. I was using the paid ones accidentally instead of the free ones. They changed their user interface to put all the paid ones above the free ones. Classic. You gotta
Makes sense, yeah.
gotta make
Makes
that
sense.
money, but fingers crossed. The demo gremlins, they always get you.
Yep. Holding thumbs and toes, maybe.
Always something. Okay, there we go.
Oh,
So now my image is loaded on there, and you can also see that my names of the components are loaded onto this as well. So it says like House on the Hill and the price that I loaded into the CMS as well. And then if I do shuffle preview data, I can see that this one's the beach house, that's $200. And then the farmhouse, that's $200. And I loaded the same image into each one for time saving at this point too. Okay, cool. So now let's clone this into our local application. So instead of just doing this up in the console, we'll want to have our own application. Okay, so I'm going to do npx create React app. And I will call this serverless. So that'll take a second to run right there.
And I suppose maybe this is slightly preempting what you are going to talk about, but if we override certain attributes, then Amplify pull will replace whatever Amplify Studio holds, right? So there is that sync.
So I'll show you how to do overrides, but you can do it so that every time you run Amplify pull, it won't override what you already wrote within these UI components.
Okay.
Essentially, you just have to do it right, and then it will all work. Will be forward and backward compatible. Okay. And then what I'm going to do, and I call this part like copy and paste driven development because it gives you all the instructions up here for what you need to do. So I'll just click this local setup instructions, then copy and paste that command. And this Amplify pull will pull this environment that I just created up in Studio down to my local development environment. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I do love the syncing up. I'm not a front-end person, but working and chatting to some other front-end people, yeah, they just love the way it integrates so easily, and also how you just connect into Visual Studio Code. And yeah, and it seems so intuitive that you create the stuff in the Amplify console, and there isn't this disconnect with what's in the cloud, what's on your local IDE. And yeah, developers love their local IDEs, which is great, and this is a perfect way just to have the best of both worlds.
For sure. And we try to mimic the Git workflow as much as possible. So the commands are the same. So it's like Amplify pull and Amplify push, which is really nice because I don't have to learn a whole new set of commands. Okay, so I'm going to install AWS Amplify UI React and AWS Amplify. Forgot the npm-i on there. So this will go ahead and install the libraries that I need. The UI components are the things here. So the buttons and all that. And then the other stuff is the AWS Amplify libraries, and that includes all of the data interaction. And if we have time to add authentication, we might, then it'll include that as well. Okay, now I'll open this up in my text editor, and I'll also run my server. Any other front-end devs on here, switch between Next.js and create React app a lot and have to remember the different npm commands. It's like npm or next run dev versus npm run start. I don't know. Can never remember these things. Ooh, people shouting out Remix in the chat too.
Yeah.
I've been trying that out a lot recently. I'm really excited about integrating Amplify more with Remix too. So if you have any feedback with using Amplify with Remix, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and TS did ask, do you believe that the future of software development may be just click and drop?
That's a really good question. I personally think, at least where I'm investing and where Amplify Studio is investing, is using tools that make developers hyper productive. So automating all the boring stuff so that you can focus your time on the individual business logic that makes your application unique. And I think that this tool really does that. Like, you don't need to worry about implementing the pixel perfect CSS yourself. You don't need to worry about the tying your front end to your back end. All those things that you've done like a million times as a front end developer, it automates that. So then you can focus on the really unique stuff that makes your app great. That's where I'm interested, at least.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Get rid of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, but whether that's still command line driven or click and drop doesn't necessarily matter. But if whatever clicking and drop you're doing or typing you're doing on the command line, if that's just related to what makes you cool and unique, then that's going to be a winner.
Yes. Okay, so I just imported the CSS file. So it's AWS Amplify UI React style.css, and then the Amplify provider, which is going to be a top-level React component that provides the styles to all of its child components. And then the other thing I'm going to do is import Amplify from AWS Amplify and my AWS exports. Okay, so this AWS exports file has all the information about where my GraphQL endpoint is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Amplify configure on that configuration information. And that's going to make it so that my front end application knows where my back end is and they can communicate with one another. And then I'm going to change this out for the Amplify provider. So now I'm configured. The only thing left that I need to do is within this, I need to import my components. And the final thing that I'm going to do before doing that is going to go back to my Amplify console here, and I'm going to create a collection. So instead of just wanting to show one of these houses, I'm going to want to show a listing of all of them. Like, you go to the Airbnb homepage and it shows you all the different houses that you can rent. I'm going to call this rental collection. And then you can choose whether it's left to right, bottom to top, if it's a grid. I will go with a grid right here with 2 columns. Sounds good to me. Then I'm going to add some padding in here. So I have, I'll go up to 5 pixels. So I have like 5 pixels in between each one. I can also go in and change which items are displayed. So if I wanted to have a filter, for example, if I'm building a blog app and I only want to show blogs with publish set to true, I could go in here and add a data filter. In addition, you might want to add some sort of sort. So again, in that blog example, the newest to oldest. Or maybe in this one, we want to do price in ascending order. And so that will sort them lowest to highest price. So I'm going to go create data set right there. And then again, all that I need to do to get that new component into my application is rerun Amplify pull.
did have a question before. Remember, Dan MBA was asking about the authorization cognito, and it's come back with the Amplify login provider gets a JWT token from cognito, but it only has the scope, not the email.
I'm not sure about that, but I could ask some of our PMs and engineers if you could send me either email. My email is spittela@amazon.com. So it's like my Twitter handle that's showing up on here, but the A in the front instead of, or the A in the back instead of at the front. Or send me a direct message on Twitter and I'll forward the message on to them. Okay. So now that Amplify pull ran again, what I'm going to go ahead and do is go into this UI components directory. This is where all of those user interface components were generated. So the list of components that I want to use is the rental collection. Okay, so rental collection right here. And my favorite part is that this is like human readable React code, right? So I added that source or that sort for making sure that my price went in ascending order. And so that is that line of code right there, like super readable to anybody who's written JavaScript before. And this is the code that fetches all of the rentals. So this is your network request essentially. And then there's the collection component, and you can see just some different props in here already. So it's the type grid, which I set in Studio as well, and the different attributes here as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and render this on my page. And just like that, I have all those beach houses laid out on my page. So I didn't have to write a lot of code or anything like that. I had the design in Figma and then generated it into Studio. One thing is that Amplify UI doesn't import the fonts by default. So I need to add that in. So I'm just going to copy and paste this line of code into my index.css. And now the fonts look great. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is show a little bit of overrides because we got a question about that. So the question was, if we went in to one of these component files and edited it, then if you run Amplify pull, all these components are regenerated. So this contact us, if I change something in it and then ran Amplify pull, it's going to overwrite this file. So you don't want to write code directly in these Amplify generated component files. So this UI components file, you don't want to write the code in there because anytime you run Amplify pull, those components are going to be overwritten. And so what you can do is you can use props within the components to override the code. So one issue that I'm having, you can see here that my images are a little wonky. They're like kind of stretched. And that's mostly because I'm bad at Figma. You can actually do responsiveness within Figma. It's called auto layout. I just am not good at it yet. So that's my problem there. And so I'm going to change this within CSS. So what I'm going to do is my rental collection, I can pass props into this. So first off, I can do type equals list, for example. And now instead of it being a grid, it's in a list. Then the next thing that I can do is sometimes you don't want to just change that top level component. So like having to do the alphabet in my head to get to my rental collection. There are a lot of components there. So in here, I might want to not just change this top level component or a collection component, but I might want to change this card A component, or even further than that, I might want to go into the card A component and change this image component or this text component or something along those lines. And when you go into these, you'll see that each one of these has this get override props. And inside this function, this is a key. So you can use this key to change any of the props within this flex component. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do overrides. And the key for this is going to be equal sign instead of a colon there. Collection dot card A sub 0, which is, if I go back into my rental collection, the override key for my card A. And then within that card A, I'm going to want to override that flex image is 0. So I'm going to grab this flex image right here. And I'll change the object fit to cover. And now my images are cropped in a different way. So you can use React props in order to override these things. And in order to see what props are overridable, you can go into Amplify UI and look at all the different components within here. So the image primitive is what I'm using for this image. So I could do object fit here. And it's honestly really nice in here. You can test out these different props in this environment. So if I want to change my height to 50%, then you can see that this Amplify logo gets small. Cool. So that's how you do overrides. The other thing, if you really, really wanted to change one of these components yourself for some reason, is you can drag these components into your own folder that you're changing yourself, and then it's not going to override that. It's not magic. It's just going to override the UI components directory. So if you dragged and dropped that file into a different directory, it's not going to override it anymore.
Cool, thanks. So yeah, so you can use this for as much scaffolding as you want, have your auto sync, and then if you need to jump out and do anything proper manually but still use the original components, you can.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. I just wanted to call out Zach Jones, Noel, and Lorcas. This is the power of having a live session in the chat. Zach Jones, Noel, and Lorcas have been sending comments back and forth and solving the world's problems, at least with their Amplify app. So yeah, appreciate that. That's what's really cool. That's why it's cool to join us live in Serverless Office Hours. It's not just hearing from myself and experts like Ali, but yeah, you can get helps and tips from your community as well. So thanks for jumping in and answering and helping each other out.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to rapid deploy authentication as well for the app. So if you go back to the Amplify Studio, there's the authentication option, and I'm going to just go with the defaults here, but you can add multi-factor authentication. You can add in sign in with Apple or Google or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy that. And I also just want to plug, while this is deploying, the update process. So when designers and developers are working together, sometimes the designer will go back to the Figma file and change something within here. So maybe we'll change the corners back to square or something along those lines. So if I change this back to 0. What I can always do in Studio is I can go back to this UI library tab and I can click sync with Figma again, and that will re-import all of my changes to this file. I'll just accept all for speed. And then now you can see that my card A within Studio has square corners, and I can run Amplify pull again to make it so that it's that way in my application as well. And so this makes it so that if the designer changes anything, I don't need to like restart my application or nothing breaks. I just re-import that Figma file and everything else stays the same, which is really nice.
Yeah, this is powerful. I mean, at this stage, nothing is actually even deployed to the cloud. This is literally just a super quick, create the components in the cloud, bring them locally, do all of your testing, do all your mocking, all of that kind of stuff without having long deployment times. Yeah, super powerful.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Cool, and now you can see my corners are square in my application as well, so everything matches there. Another thing that I can do too is I can pass in theming as well. So again, I talked at the very beginning about the Figma theming plugin. So that's another option. You can also pass in themes within your code as well. So if you go to the UI docs, there's this overview for theming. And essentially what you'll want to do is pass an object that looks something like this. And so you can change the primary color value, for example, in this object here. You can also do it within CSS if you're more comfortable with CSS. So you can either change like primary color using the global variables, or you can use CSS classes to just change one button or something along those lines. You can also use design tokens, which is outside of my world, but they seem really, really cool. And authentication is deploying. That's the fun part about demos again, is the
taking its time.
Yeah, taking its time.
So just on general sort of Amplify things, other than Amplify Studio, what's sort of getting you excited, or what could people look forward to, or what should people know, or that's that they may not know, and what would you direct them on the Amplify side?
For sure, for sure. So I'm personally really excited about Amplify Studio. It's about what I'm spending most of my time on since it's in developer preview and I can really get that feedback into the product. But other than that, I'm really excited about Amplify hosting as well. That's growing really fast, and it's really awesome to see how quickly you can get something deployed on AWS. You don't need to like spin up your own setup or anything like that. It's like a single click deploy. You can just import your repo from GitHub for your front-end application and then deploy it through Amplify front-end hosting. And we support Next server-side rendering as well, which is also very exciting. I've been using Next.js a ton recently. Also, the extensibility features that came at reInvent as well, I think that those are a really big boon for customers as well, because then they can use the entire AWS ecosystem, not just the tools that are enabled by default within Amplify. You can also use your own DevOps pipeline as well, instead of needing to use Amplify directly for that.
Yeah, I have always loved on some of the projects we've been working on with Ben, our good designer, and James as well. And how simple Amplify connects in, and being able to modify the CI/CD pipelines and do all the testing and all, things like that. Yeah, for a backend kind of person, it really is such a great way to be able to get really simple, well, complicated, can be complex front ends, but deployed very simply.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to show how easy it is to add authentication now. So I enabled authentication within Studio. And I'm going to wrap my app component with Authenticator. And now it's going to make me sign in before I go to my application. So I've got a full sign-in flow. It's going to send me an email in order to confirm my password once I create an account and all of that. And that was it, like one line of code in order to get that going. So that's what we talked about at the beginning with Flutter, is we just enabled this for Flutter as well.
Super cool. I love that. So yeah, that is, and just literally wrap. I mean, even seeing it, just wrapping your authentication your app within your authenticator process, done.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Nothing more complicated than that. Amplify has other services that are enabled too. So you can add, for example, serverless functions through Lambda, and you can add that to your app through Amplify add and then the category. So Amplify add function, for example, in order to add a serverless function to your application. Also, if you have a more complicated setup than what is allowed through Studio, you can do Amplify update that category locally in the command line interface, and you can update it through there as well to see all the different options.
Cool. Ali, that is super awesome. Anything you'd like to tell us in our last minute or two? Or
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. I will say that if anybody is more of a visual learner or likes to learn things in a step-by-step thing, I have this same tutorial in a blog post, just in case that's helpful for anybody who learns in a different way. So I put it in our private chat.
Is that okay? I will add it into the, thank you for that. I will, thank you, Ali. I'll put that into the main chat. So that's over there.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, Ali, I super appreciate you spending some awesome time today showing all the glories of Amplify Studio and other Amplify things. Yeah, super cool. Thanks for coming along.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. Next week, we're back on Lambda, and we've got always the amazing, incredible Eric Johnson, who's going to be chatting to Dan Fox and maybe also another secret guest. And this is TypeScript in SAM. So lots of Node developers, jumping on TypeScript and absolutely loving it. Well, SAM's making things much easier, which is going to be super cool. So Dan has got some good demos, and the always vivacious Eric is going to be on. Just a point of time zones. American time zones changed. So I'm just seeing there, it says 6 p.m. UK. I think it's actually 5 p.m. UK, and maybe the Central European time would be an hour earlier as well. So yeah, just think of your time zones before the rest of the world's meetings get messed up. Over the next week. Zach Jones, Mill, TypeScript and SAM, absolutely wow. Of course, for other things on serverless, this has got to be updated. I see it says 153. It's over 200 templates within the serverless patterns collection. So if you are connecting API Gateway and Amplify or Amazon, DynamoDB or EventBridge or all these kind of things, there's probably a SAM or a CDK pattern out there for you. So really go and have a look at that site. That's going to properly turbocharge your serverless development. And then for all other things on serverless, head to serverlessland.com, a great landing page. We talk about events and patterns and learning paths and videos and blogs and all things related with serverless on AWS. So thank you, Ali, for joining us. Thank you for your questions and your commentary and helping each other as being awesome stewards of the community. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll certainly see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.